The 18th Assembly Moscow Health. Let's continue our fourth day of this forum's work. And today, right now, in our whole Mudrov, we will talk about how we can fight the aging. Should we fight it? What are the successes? What are fundamental and applied developments and research about aging? I'd like to introduce our participants, our speakers, to as fast as possible to go to the discussion itself, because they flew here from different corners, not only Moscow but the whole globe. So, Dr. Brian Kennedy, Director of Center of Healthy Aging, the National University of Healthcare System, Emeritus Professor of Biochemistry and Physiology in Medical School, named after Yun Lo Lin, National University of Singapore. Anthony Atala, Director of Institute of Regenerative Medicine, Wake Forest, Chair of Urology, Medical School. Mikhail Batin, President of Foundation of Support of Scientific Research, Science for the Longevity. Danila Medvedev, futurologist, author of many publications and interview about future. And my name is Vladimir Filipov, Deputy Head of Department of Labor and Social Protection of the Citizens of Moscow. But I'm not here as a public official, but as a sociologist and moderator, and I hope, as well as I am, you will also receive a lot of joy and pleasure, and at the end we will be able to have a short discussion, but mostly we hope that our panelists will not only talk about their points and answer my questions, but maybe argue with each other to learn about longevity and aging as much as possible. I'd like to start with Dr. Brian Kennedy. So your center is one of the most well-known and leader in research and developments. And when we prepared for this health assembly, we talked about some gene transplantation in animals and use of to use it in neurodegenerative diseases. Could you please tell us about main research and results? What's in focus of your attention?
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I think that... sorry.
Sounds good.
Our center is really focused on trying to regulate the biology of aging. And so the belief is that there are underlying factors that can control how you get old, and if you maintain normal, healthy functioning as you get old, you can stay disease-free and highly functional. But what happens is that people lose that homeostasis, things break down and they start to get sick. And so rather than trying to treat diseases of aging, we're trying to look for interventions in healthy people that will keep them healthy longer. So I think that the main focus is on extending what we call health span and not so much lifespan. And if we can keep people healthy longer, that's a major economic boost to the economy of Singapore, and it's also the best way to improve life quality in the population is by keeping people healthy and happy and functional. So we're looking at trying to design clinical studies focused on prevention and keeping people healthy.
In your work, in your research, there is some information about animal transplantation. For instance, genes from some animals that helps not only with for sand moles, and it helps with preventing aging at people. Is humanity have chance to live longer through this genetic changing?
Yeah, my research over the years has been trying to find the genes that affect the aging process. And we've worked in multiple types of animals, everything from simple yeast cells to worms, and most recently we have a large number of studies in mice. And those studies have helped identify the pathways that control aging. Now the strategy is to figure out how to modify those pathways to keep not just animals, of course, but people healthy longer. And there are many different strategies to do that. You could think about drugs that modify specific pathways, natural products, even lifestyle changes. But there are also emerging strategies like gene therapy and other approaches which can directly modify the activity of a particular gene. And I think that right now I'm agnostic to the type of intervention that's used. Our main goal is to validate that we can really affect the human aging process. Ultimately, it may be through gene therapy approaches or organ regeneration approaches that Dr. Atala works on that have the biggest impact. But right now, we want to just show that we can make health span longer. And so we're focused mainly on supplements and drugs because we can test those in humans now. They're ready for implementation.
In Russia, and maybe in Europe and the US as well. So in Russia in recent years, the marketing campaigns, when they like to use, so it doesn't contain GMO. So how much should we be afraid of GMO? Because gene changing and opens a lot of opportunities. So how GMO and all this acronym GMO just a marketing tool, or it's really care about health of consumers?
Well, I don't want to discount any concern over interventions that might affect the health of consumers. Drugs, for instance, have side effects. Even natural products can have side effects. And so nothing is without any risk. I tend to think that the genetic modification concerns are a little bit overblown. In the agriculture industry, genetic modification has been happening in some form or other for a long time. And it's not without risk, but I think that it's a very plausible and feasible opportunity to move forward with to try to change pathways and actually impact people's health. So I think we need to be a little bit cautious on how we do it, but I'm optimistic that there will be strategies that will ultimately be successful.
Thank you very much. My next question is to Anthony Atala. For several decades, you've been working on creating human tissues, and you've been doing it. You are the most successful, and you create this artificial tissue of liver, heart, lungs. You're planning to create some other organ tissues for some survivals of different accidents. So it's very important, have very important applied sense. So could you please tell our audience what are the latest achievements in this area? What organs are we now for sure can grow, and with like nature, and with what organs we have the most a lot of difficulties?
Absolutely. So the work that we've been doing really centers on creating tissues and organs for patients at the time that they start to fail or basically end up with disease. You know, the fact is that as we age, our organs tend to fail more. And if you look at the incidence of organ failure, it has increased substantially in the last several decades. So right now, for example, in a 10-year period, the number of people requiring an actual organ for transplantation has basically doubled, while at the same time the number of transplants has gone up less than 1%. And the reason for that, of course, is we're living longer. And the longer we live, the more that our organs will tend to fail with age. So the concept here is how do we start to reverse that process and to reverse the process of disease and organs as we age. And we can do that by intervening early, and that's part of what we're, some of the latest work that we're doing is we have been working on creating tissues and organs for patients, and we do that by using the patient's own cells. So we take a very small sample of a patient's organ, less than half the size of a postage stamp. We expand the cells outside the body. We then create three-dimensional molds that we can create by hand or through 3D printing, and then create these structures that we can put back into patients. So we can do that when the organ fails, but the new thing that we're going after is really trying to intervene early so that you don't have to replace the organ when it's already failed, but that you can rescue the organ before it starts to fail.
So during maybe last years, the technologies are becoming more and more perfect, and so patients after transplantation, even of some organs, live longer and longer. So how fast technologies are changing and how people live after transplantation of these artificial organs?
Yeah, so basically, of course, there are two ways to do this. One is typical transplantation, where you are using the organ from somebody else. And that means that typically that can be a living related donor for a kidney, for example, or an organ where there are two of them, like the kidney, where you can get that organ from your brother, your sister, your cousin, or someone who passed away, someone who died. And you get these organs and you transplant them. And when you do this, it's a great thing to do for these patients. But the fact is that these organs still tend to fail. About 50% tend to fail within 10 years. And that really has to do with the issues of rejection. And of course, there's a major shortage of organs as well. So right now, the demand is so high and the supply of these organs is very low. So those are the challenges with typical transplantation. So what we're trying to do is, the efforts that we're going after is to actually create tissues and organs from your own cells. And by doing so, by creating these tissues from your own cells, and taking the sample tissue from your own body and growing those cells and creating these organs outside the body, when we put them back into the body, you're not going to need any rejection drugs. And those organs will continue to survive long term. So one of the first organ, actually the first organ we implanted was the bladder, and those patients are still doing well now about 15 years later after we implanted that first organ. We currently have about 15 different technologies that we have implanted into patients, either organs or tissues or cell-based therapies that we're targeting for tissues. So just about 4 weeks ago, we implanted our 15th technology into a patient. These are still, of course, in clinical trials. It takes a long time to get these technologies all the way through phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. But the goal is really to try to increase these organs and tissues in patients in the future.
Dear friends, you see, it's very important to maintain good relations with your relatives, your blood relatives, especially if, God forbid, something happens, but still rejection may happen. But investment in science give us hope that transplanted organs will not be rejected. So it's very good news, but it does not mean that you shouldn't praise your family relations. Thank you. And now I'd like to ask Mikhail Batin, who's the president of the Foundation of Research and Social Entrepreneur, who invests quite a lot in development of technologies and work with aging topics. So, Mikhail, how important is diagnosis of aging? Because this is a process that humanity has during its whole history, and we think it's normal. But now, at the end of 20th, at the turn of 21st centuries, we talk about aging process as something that we should stop or try to prolongate as much as possible our lifespan. What do you think? So first of all, let's try to understand what we're talking about here. We're discussing aging, but it's not just some scientific task. So we're talking about up till what age we will live. So at what moment everybody who's present here today will be dead? And that's a very important question. It's not about these technologies or that technologies. Maybe we will not live up to all these technologies. What's the problem? So in 1985 there was a book in the US, I forgot the title, where it was said that by Saul Kent, by 2020 they promised living forever, so no death. And so within 35 years we always made some forecasts about anti-aging drugs. And it wasn't possible to imagine that by 2020 we will not have some weak drugs of anti-age. So to continue our life at least for 20, 30 years, maybe through gene therapy. So all forecasts of 2000, of the beginning of 2000, was related to all these anti-aging drugs that we will live for 20, 30 years longer. And then to use all these years and live even longer. We were supposed to come to this victory over death. But after the failure of the most efficient of the drug, so erythromycin, that we had the most high hopes for at the third clinical stage. Now we have no drugs, no technology by 2020 that will give us any hope. And that's a big issue, and that's what we are discussing. That we're in a situation of all hope failure. So nothing was done, so all the trials were very weak. And one of the issues that science were not funded, so only talks about science are funded, only sales and supplements are funded. So there are no funds in fundamental science, because our focus is on this promise. But it's just a promise. So it's sort of irresponsible, because we can promise you that we will grow you 5 arms, change all the genes, and 30 years later everybody's dead. So that's called a big issue. So what's the problem with aging? And it's a problem of growing complexity. The more we learn about aging, the more we open doors. We open door and there are more, it's like 1,000 doors. So aging is a very complicated process, related to chronic inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, accumulation of mutations, change of intercellular matrix. All these processes are described by a million factors, and we have to compare all of them. So each year we'll learn more and more facts that will not make us closer to the solution of aging, but only make us go far away from it. So going back to the gist of the question about diagnosis. So diagnosis of aging is the way how to change social and scientific situation. So if we think that aging is an issue, because it's an issue, because we will be dead, so we'll stop existing, so we should receive it in numbers, in figures. We should what kind of changes we have on our indicators. Only if we have just a tonometer and centimeters, we still should try to measure all these factors, BMI, so waist, weight. So we should show that, measure the wrinkles. So understand all the changes that a human is undergoing when aging. So we know about gene changing, about biochemical changes. So all the parameters that relate to death, so we should understand all these parameters.
So since we understand how big this problem is, we have to turn people into big data. we have to be able to evaluate millions of parameters. Otherwise, we won't be able to make any progress. You know, some people speak about antioxidants or telomeres, or maybe some analytics that could be given, or immunosuppressants. All these stories are in the past. If you hear about some simple solutions that can extend your life, it's not true. It's a vulgar simplification of aging process. We have to develop technologies based on big data that can do many interventions. And of course, this is related to a search for the drivers for aging. And this is another goal that we face. If people understand that aging has to include digital healthy lifestyle, not just real healthy lifestyle, and this involves big data. When we understand anguldumin concentration and cholesterol level, we have to understand what kind of medications we need. So diagnostics is the primary goal if we want to fight aging, and it depends on its quality. Yeah, we can give a round of applause. Emotions. Mikhail, you have been funding research of different aging mechanisms. What's your motivation? Do you want to make a contribution? Do you want to remain in history? You are one of very few people that do it. There's a legend. Alexander of Macedonia, he said that you can put 2 holes into the coffin after I die, and you can put my hands through these holes and say that I owned everything. So, you know, this person basically owned the world, but he couldn't take it all with him to the grave. I'm surprised that billionaires die. Is this logical, or you can just find some medicine from aging and stay alive, or is it okay to die poor? You know, the capitalization of investors is on the 0 level. The best thing is just to keep alive. That's the best thing for a person and for society. The best thing would be to save as many people as possible, because basically it's aging that kill people. Cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer disease, cancer. So it all comes with aging, and we have to understand that we are in the state of coming to death, and it's all because of aging. We have more and more bad cells, and this is what we have to deal with. If you hear somebody say, let's do football, do something else, or let's accumulate capital, but that's not the right thing. We are now trying to see different values. So we are fighting with our values. What's the best value? So the technologies have to maintain life, and if they don't do it, then it means that they're doing something else. And we have to win in the ethical arguments, in the ethical dispute. So I think the most important thing is to act against aging. And the main question that we should ask, why haven't you done anything to fight aging? Why have you decided to die this year or this month? Why do you agree with dying over a month or so? So it's very reasonable. And if you think that, oh, we are going to live for a long time, that's not the issue. The issue is that we have to do something to fight aging. You know, if we can formulate the question in the right way, then sometimes it's much better than the answer. We are having a lot of people in this room. We have over 500 people online who got connected to the broadcasting. So I wanted to ask another question. Many people speak about Russia having its own way of development, its own unique way. So should we work in isolation, or should we work together? You know, Lenin used to say, first you have to split and then you have to come together. So what's about scientific community? What's more important for you? It's interesting that you mentioned a unique way, but are there many Russian people that fight against aging? Brian, yeah, that's the question for you. Are there many Russian entrepreneurs or Russian scientists that fight against aging in America and in the world?
I think there's been a lot of interest in Russia in terms of trying to slow aging more than in other countries. And in fact, I find myself here quite a lot to have discussions about what can be done to the aging process. And I think there's an opportunity as well because, you know, the system that's set up in the US is not really set up to do anything about aging. It's set up to treat sick people. We do sick care in the US, not really health care. And the pharmaceutical companies make money off treating sick people. They don't make money off preventing disease. The hospitals tend to make money off procedures. They don't make money off keeping people out of the hospital. And I think that the system is set up with so many perverse incentives in Western countries that there's really the fundamental reason, which I agree with Misha, that progress has been slow. The fundamental reason is the resources just haven't been there to develop this field. So I'm more optimistic than Misha is, and actually I've been fighting with Misha himself for at least 10 years on this. But I think that there is an opportunity for Russia because there's a lot of interest in slowing aging, and there's also access to big data and a lot of smart computational people that are trying to solve problems. So I'm encouraged whenever I come here about the excitement.
The thing is that when we look at Russia, we realize that we are lagging behind. You know, we are somewhere at the bottom. But there is one area related to transhumanism and the idea to extend life. This is our strength. We have it historically. This year we're going to celebrate 170th anniversary of Mechnikov, who used to say aging is a sickness or is a disease. And there were researchers, cosmic and spatial scientists, and many scientists used to say that the most important thing is to fight against death. So transhumanism has two predecessors: Nietzsche, the super person, and we can see people with implants in their heads, and it's all about merging with artificial intelligence. It's all about superpower that superhumans will have. And the other concept is our common good, and this is our super mission. Let's get together to fight against death. Scientist Fedorov said it in the last century. It's been 140 years since then. We have built a lot of factories to burn people, but we are still at the same stage. You know, people are quite egoistical and selfish. Maybe they prefer to sell biologically active substances, and there'll be lines of people queuing for it. It's very difficult to act for the common good, but this is it. No billionaire could find a recipe, some medication against aging. We have to get together and do this work continuously. And scientists can't do anything without money. And I can tell you as a biologist, there's no life without money. So, and there's no institute to extend life. It doesn't exist in Singapore or Moscow. Yes, Brian was a head of institute, but they had 3 buildings and $40 million for yearly budget. So we need billions, and we have to bring all people together. This must be our priority task. Maybe you have noticed that the president's decree in May set the task to extend life. We have to extend it at least by 1 year each year, so it leads to immortality. But you know that presidential decree are not addressed, and people are not willing to fulfill them, and we are trying to have different events, like we come up with different initiatives, Moscow longevity or healthy lifestyle, but it requires big data. Once we have big data, we'll reach success. It's like an exam. Should we be together or should we not? If you don't, then the next generation will have the same issue. Then they'll die, the next generation. We are living in the 21st century. It's high time we created good technologies, and think about it. I'm responsible for Moscow program, longevity program, and I'll be happy to invite you. So when are you going to have your meeting? I'm having meetings every day. We should discuss it. But we'll be happy to involve more specialists. You know, being officials, we always give reports, and I can say that our project has been existed for 1.5 years. So we have 200,000 retired people, Moscow residents that joined us. You know, 200,000 people is a lot. Well, somebody might think that it's not enough. Many people like to be nostalgic and think of Soviet past, that it was better during Soviet time. But I can tell you that during Soviet time, only 160,000 people overall, including children, that were involved in different activities. And as to retired people, only 10,000 of people did something and took part in different events. So it's great that we give this opportunity as a city to make, not only to live a longer life, but also to have a more interesting life, more involved life. And now let me ask a question to Daniil Medvedev. Many people know him as the author of many different publications. He has written a lot of books. I remember a film with Louis de Funès, when somebody had a lethargic sleep while traveling through time. So there were many interesting things that happened in those stories. So Daniil, what do you think? What kind of future are we going to have if the government find the resources and the researchers will take an active part in this? So what do you think will happen? Thank you for your question. You know, it's true that there's a lot of sci-fi written about it, but the most important thing is to see how our society is going to change. So if we are not going to deal with immortality, if we still have a lot of barriers. So now we are living in 2020, but let's think about 1980. 2080. So Mikhail comes with a stick with help of others, and he keeps saying, we have to fight, and then he falls asleep. So this is what we might see, and maybe Brian Kennedy will have a hologram only, and even though we develop and create organs and having the third stage of these experiments, but I think it's more interesting to see the bad reality that might happen. And let me share some statistics. Many people live not because of aging. It's doctors that kill people. If we take the statistics from the US, each third person die because of anthrax reasons. And it means that it was due to doctors. Doctors might have given a right prescription, or they forgot to give some medication, or did something wrong. And the lifespan does no longer go up in America. So 15% of GDP is spent on healthcare, but still they can't extend life of people because the life period doesn't grow. And the cost of new medication grows twofold. We are speaking about scientific progress, that there are more and more new results, but it's not true. They are less with every year, and it's a paradox. So we, myself as a futurologist, have to understand this. We can't hope that we'll get some medicine coming from the sky. And I have to say that we failed fighting against aging. And I remember 10 years ago we discussed whether we should what kind of issues we should deal with, and we realized that we have to explain how important it is to fight against aging, but we forgot about some things. It's not enough to win, we have to do something, and it turned out to be much harder than we thought. So if we want to become immortal, we have to get back to transhumanism, what Mikhail calls chips in your head, and there are technologies that we can use to replant heads. We can put a head of one person to another body, and then they can continue living. There is another technology that has been introduced by different startups in the US. It's about blood transfusion. We take a young person, young body that has low aging markers, good state, so we transfuse his blood into the body of an old billionaire. Of course, the results are unpredicted, but we can get $8,000 for transfusion of 1 liter of blood if we work with billionaires. And the donors can give half a liter, so $4,000 is earned. So if you want to be immortal, you have to have only 1,000 compatible donors. And there are heads of states, heads of large corporations. China has its own political decisions. They can put all the Tibetans in concentration camp and take organs from them. Of course, we do not approve of that. We live in a democratic state, but that's what they might do in China. So if we say that human being is big data, but you know, it's much more than that. There are ideas, honor and dignity, and many other things. Now, let's take an American startup. I'm sure that it's a good thing. NICTOM, they do brain scanning, and a person gets destroyed during the scanning process, but we have a digital copy.
And so after this, you can just read all the connectome, all the neuron connections, save it, and sometimes in the future, all this connectome may be launched through some supercomputer. So, in my opinion, as a futurologist, all these options look fantastical, but the thing is that we will fight aging in 10 years look even much more unrealistic. So, if we talk about this not just some sensational topic, but as some task, we should stop being scared, being or fear in front of all these solutions. So there are solutions, but they're a bit strange, maybe scary. Anthony Atala is growing, has been growing tissues and organs for many years, and for some organs that have been grown but are not used. For instance, in the years they created heart and it was implanted for many years, for several years. And for a person who would have died, could have lived for 2 years, but insurance companies stopped this project because for each surgery, for each transplant surgery, you will have to pay a lot of money. So if there are some artificial organs, so the number of transplantations would increase many times. So today we can imagine a person who is starting to age. So one of gerontologists told me that people die out of 2 reasons. Either the heart stops beating or lungs stop working. The rest not so important. So if we can replace the heart by artificial one, so we solve this death issue by 50%. I think the future of age fighting, when we understand that we can't fight aging, we shouldn't try to move that horse faster through some physical impact. It's already dead. We should get out of it and look out for some new alive horse. And it's some cybernetic horse, it's AI horse, some hybrid of a human and the machine. And here maybe we'll find much more faster victories. And I'm not concerned that, for instance, I will not have a natural heart, that part of my brain will be replaced by some microchips. It's normal. If I still understand myself as me, if I can read some authors and be happy that I'm not aging and I'm not dying. So that's script the scenario that as an alternative that we can fight this aging. So I'd like to give the floor to Brian. He wanted to comment.
I just wanted to respond a little bit to that. I'm a PhD and not an MD, so maybe I can defend doctors a little bit. And I'm rarely the one who ends up defending the American healthcare system because I think it's broken in many different ways. But it's not primarily doctors that are killing people. It's the reason life expectancy is not going up in the U.S. is that bad lifestyle, obesity, and other things are really impacting long-term health of the population. So, and I think this brings up a dichotomy that we tend to talk about, and maybe it's worth making explicit. There are strategies now, lifestyle strategies you can take that will impact your life. You will be healthy longer. In general, you will live longer. And those are modest effects, so exercise, diet, stress. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind, as all of us are aging in this room, and there are things we can do that have a positive impact. So those are probably modest changes. Maybe you get an extra 5 years of health and life out of doing those things. To me, that's still a big impact. And then there are more radical things that you're talking about. And I think that I'm not against radical research and radical solutions. I think they're further down the road. We're not ready for them yet. But we need to be thinking both in the near term and in the long term. And so I just want to leave everyone with the concept that there are changes you can make right now that will have an impact on your health long term. And I'm fully encourage everyone to consider them.
Mikhail, да, я...
Mikhail, I'm feeling that you'd like to say something. I will disagree with. I can't agree with neither of you. So we should stop talking about healthy lifestyle because it's common sense. We can't even discuss like we should wash, we should take shower today and tomorrow. We don't discuss it. It's natural. So healthy lifestyle, it goes without saying. It's already one. So people don't smoke. People are giving up smoking. It doesn't matter right now. It's not that we are not doing this 10,000 steps. We have issues. Issues are inside because it's an internal property of our body. So this talk about healthy period of life impedes us. So we are gathered here to talk about issues, and we start talking about exercise, thinking that it's already all solved. This healthy lifestyle can be implemented and get everything you need, but it will not solve the problem even by 2%. I don't agree with Danila that we should not oppose this technology, that better, this better. Technologies are more or less uniform. There are some super technologies like AI that treat all this, process all the big data. In regenerative medicine, all the cybernetization, so understanding of aging, geroprotectors. So we are doing more or less in the uniform way. So we shouldn't reallocate resources from one research to another. But the problem is that we spend a lot of advertisements on some frivolous spending. So that's the issue. It's not the issue of choice of this scientific research or that. The problem is overall that scientific research overall is underfunded. Our the task is to discuss how to make this lifespan prolongation makes the crucial task. Does this conference also ask, no, let's use another one? So let's think about some other solutions. For instance, in Miami, there is, or Las Vegas, I was, there are great surveys, trials, quite safe, related to markers, I think. If it doesn't work, let's just go through all this. You will not solve it through going through different methods. Your life will not be enough. Even thousands of lives will not be enough. As you say, you shouldn't talk about healthy lifestyle, the same as I can tell you about this trial and error things. So when Halschuler says that this trial and error method will not work, first you should think. Of course, we should think. You suggest without thinking, just no. There are so I don't really envy our interpreters right now. I'd like now to give the floor to Anthony.
Push it.
Hello? Okay, there you go. So I think this is an excellent discussion, really a very, very interesting discussion. I think we have to go back to the past a little bit to look into the future. And I think everyone is so passionate about their beliefs, and that's wonderful because, believe it or not, just 30 years ago, people were not talking about aging. So the fact that we're talking about aging right now and that we actually have this discussion is already a big advance for the field of research. And that's really based on some of the folks sitting here who've been working on aging for so long. But if we go back to the year 1900, the average mortality for a female back then was about 40 years of age. The average mortality for a person in the year right now for a female is about 80 years of age. So doubling of the longevity of someone in 100 years. And how did that happen? So we have to look back. Of course, a lot of it was just managing disease, right? A lot of newborns that were dying, a lot of people were dying young, infection that was killing people. And so the field of medicine and science and research made a lot of advances in a 100-year period and doubled the life expectancy by just taking care of basic things. Okay, so now let's look back at the last 30 years. What has happened in the last 30 years? The largest group of growth of the population, at least in the U.S., is the people in their 80s. That is their largest group of growth right now, is people who are in their 80s. Unheard of, right? Just think back to when you were, some of you, when you were children and you would see people who were 50 and 60, how old they look and acted, and look at people now, how young they look. So, you know, everybody says the 70 of today was the 60, was the 60 of yesterday. So the fact is there already has been a lot of progress. The question is, how are we going to make more progress? And the thing about that is really, one of the most important things is, it's not just about living longer. It's about living longer with a better quality of life. And that's what it's really all about. And so doing all this research that is being pushed for today is basically advancing that, but it's going to take time. You know, it does take time. It's not just about markers that are being looked at. It's not just about making organs younger. It's about having a strategy to treat patients in addition to good nutrition, like Brian mentioned, and good healthy lifestyles, in addition to what Mikhail said about, you know, artificial intelligence and all the stuff that Antonov's talked about in terms of the future, is really bringing all of these things together, and for researchers to work together to make sure that we can make these advances faster.
Thank you. Many years ago, relatively, so in this millennia, in some scientific journals I read articles about cryogenics. And so Danila, I think, so how this cryohibernation is actual today? Maybe it was just a hype. What about this? What about this delayed life? How is it popular? I think it's very topical, and every day more and more, because people understand that eternal life may be real. So if in 60s immortality, it seems like a joke. So now even kids read about it, see something about it, some Hollywood, Marvel movies. They understand this super ability is possible, and cryonics is the only way today that can help a human who is dying because of old age. So if a person today is dying, so each of us, if we are not dying yet of aging, we have some relatives, we have our parents, grandparents. So everyone who will not live till when we get this anti-age pill or this head transplant. And so cryonics is like the only option. And the attitude that we have in Russia is quite positive, taking into account that the US and Russia are leaders in this area, and the US started doing it in the 1960s, and we started only in 2000s. I think it's a very good sign. And I'd like that at some moment all the attitude toward death in society will change, and will try to keep a person, not to put it into ground. And I'd also like to say that each of us has this responsibility to change the lifestyle, but not only in terms of diet and exercise, but also in terms of our mentality, our mental life. So each of us, not only I can be a futurologist, you can be a futurologist for yourself, for your relatives. So you can discuss future with your children, with your parents, and say that, for instance, I heard that such a thing can be done. What do you think about it? What do you think about nanorobots? What do you think about loading your consciousness into the computer, about this cryonics? When people start thinking about it, then they will start asking, creating this demand, like we want this. Not like that we want just parks, more pedestrian areas in cities. This problem will be already solved. They will ask for that we want more stations for head transplants. We want more cloning devices, that they will be Russian-made and not expensive. So the future is changing. If you remember this 1900, as Anthony mentioned, so in 1900 we didn't have microwave, washing machine, cars, planes, of course not so no space crafts. So 100 years past, the world changed a lot. Now we have to get ready for some other transhuman future, and cryonics is a totally normal way to pass to let go your dying relative. So here there are some people whose relatives died and who froze them through this cryonics. Or for instance, your favorite cat died and people froze the cat through this cryonics. In the future, to revive this cat, to put some upgrade in its brain and make some philosophical talks. So when we start thinking about it in our head properly, then each of us can understand, and it doesn't matter what we are doing, that it depends on the future, depends on each of us. And here, to use Vladimir Filippov, I'd like to talk about the future, how the future depends on us. So Vladimir Filippov, deputy head of Department of Labor and Social Security. I'm here. So Department of Labor, of course, they don't work with education formally or science formally. They work with social help, social care. But they have labor, so there are professions. So if there are professions, there are professional standards. And that's already an interesting door. They're talking about professional standards of gerontologists, geriatrists, and to put into the standards everything that we think proper and reasonable. Another way is some professions of the future. For instance, we can say that in Moscow we need more nanotechnologists, more specialists on brain changes, more cryonic specialists, and so on. So there is a very serious, very difficult topic. Maybe you will not understand, but I'd like to share. In the UK, they will soon celebrate Brexit. When they leave the EU. So a person who organizes voting, Dominic Cummings, is a very smart person, and he organizes vote to reload, to reset this regulatory system of the UK. So all the organizational structures will be changed. So he decided that to prepare the society, the global society, for this immortality, strong AI, we need at some specific country to make order, to put it in order. So he put his intelligence into making Brexit. It's not that Moscow should leave Russia. I don't offer this. Please note that. I don't suggest that. But if somehow we can change some professions of the future, then we can put there some standards for some intellectual professions, like strengthening of intelligence, and at some point start preparing our managers and officials to increasing their brains with more systematic understanding of futurology, and at some point these prepared specialists at some Moscow universities, they will be able to come to this system and to implement all the plans as no one could before. It's for 5 years plan. But it can show you that potentially today Vladimir Filippov can leave this discussion and start thinking, maybe just on me, it depends on me how immortality will be reached. So what I'm describing, it's not some fantasy, it's a question of choice. But most people make choice like, tomorrow will be the same as today, nothing has to be done, nothing depends on me. And some people think that everything depends on me. And one case per 100, it becomes true. Such people move progress ahead, forward. I like the idea of teaching life to Vladimir Filippov. I'd like to join in. I don't know if Daniel knows or not, Vladimir Filippov has 9 billion rubles for Moscow longevity program, so it's very important. A bit more, 15. If we speak about Moscow longevity, in budget it's 5.5 billion per year. If we speak about the whole social security, it's of course more. Social care. So it sounds quite elegant. So it would be great to have a big scientific part in such a program. And I think maybe some fundamental contribution and then it will not be in vain that we are all gathered here today. So each of you should approach this person, Vladimir, and speak about, let's put some social pressure on him, about let's add some science, and let's not let him go before he funds all this scientific basis.
Because we are having excellent scientists here, and there's only one small step left. My question is for Anthony Ottawa. So you are real stars of today's science. What can make you act differently? Instead of sending applications to institutes and other things, could you become different? What can make you very special and unique to fight for life?
So I think that one of the major things, of course, is really how do we make patients' lives better? That's really what it is. How to make people's lives better is what one of the things I said before, Michael. It's not just the longevity, it's actually living longer with a higher quality of life. And it does take a lot of effort. I mean, you know, for actually to do this research, you know, you have to apply for grants, you have to do, you know, the return rate for your grants is very low. There's no really focused funding that goes into one specific area. Basically, what happens with research is that you're getting a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there, and you're pushing things very slowly, very, very slowly in research. And that's really not how major discoveries get advanced. The way that you advance major discoveries is by major investments. And so to basically get the government, any government, whether it's the US government, the government here, the government anywhere, in any country in Europe, anywhere in the world, really to come together and say, we're going to fight this particular area. How can we get our best researchers in these particular areas to come together and actually work together to advance research? And you know, we're humans. So what happens in science is what happens in a business, what happens at home, what happens in your workplace. Basically, people tend to compete with each other. People tend to compete. So if you're asking me what's the one thing we can do about longevity, is recognize, all of us, recognize as scientists, researchers, government officials, and citizens, that the competition is not another company, the competition is not another country, the competition is not another person. The competition is the disease. The competition is aging. And how can we all come together to fight this as one body?
Brian?
I really think, especially when it comes to aging, this is a global problem. It's happening everywhere, and it requires global solutions and people working together around the globe to try to solve problems. I spend still half my time trying to raise money. That's time I'm not training young scientists. That's time I'm not trying to have visionary ideas about where to go with the research in the future. It's basically spinning the past to try to convince people to give me money to keep doing science. And I would love if there was a system in place where, you know, we identified aging, the diseases of aging, as that's the climate change of healthcare. This is the biggest issue in healthcare for this century. And if there was a way to really put the resources it required in, I think it would dramatically accelerate scientific discovery, both in the near term and in the long term.
Thank you. So we can take some questions from the audience. And before I ask you to... before I start these Q&A sessions, I ask you not to come up with suggestions about joint ventures. Please ask questions that would be interesting for the whole audience. You should ask your questions in the microphone. I can suggest something. I ask not to advertise and not to promote your own projects. It's not my own project. It's a real thing. It's real eternal life. That's one of the problems, and we have met many people at different events that some people offer some ointment or some electromagnetic instruments, and we know that we should ignore such suggestions. You're welcome. Yes, you. My question is for Vladimir Filipov and others. My question is very short. I talked to Brian, and Brian still has two problems. Looking for right people that are ready to take part in clinical experiments, and the second one is funding. So perhaps Moscow could become a city where each citizen could take part in clinical experiments and clinical trials and make their own contribution, maybe small contribution, maybe 10 rubles per month, but they could make this contribution into longevity problem. Well, I can be very brief. You have seen probably a stand that is called Digital Patient. We digitized 100,000 of medical records that are kept at our outpatient clinics. So each person can register and get access to their digital medical records. And you will find a lot of new information. So we made this first step as a city to turn all the documents digitally, including prescriptions and diseases and other information. Then we are going to unite medical records of our relatives, brothers and sisters and parents, so that we could get information that would be relevant, and we are trying to analyze this data. So this decree, and then we could approve it with a special decree, with a special regulation. Sometimes we see a lot of resistance, and I mean psychological resistance from doctors and patients. Nobody wants to make changes, but everybody wants to live a different life. That's why we organize meetings. We invite our colleagues from Singapore, America, and Europe to see what kind of problems we might have to avoid them. I have a question. Don't you think that you have started it from a wrong end? You know, there's traditional medical care, but there's also untraditional, unconventional medical care. But maybe we should focus more on it to study the signals. You know, if we take biochemical and chemical processes, you know, there are always some signals that we can observe. Electromagnetic waves. Maybe we should start from there. So maybe we could use those things. Oh, no, no. God save us from that. But if you take people... My question is for all speakers. So you say that we should abandon the conventional science, and do something. It's a false science, it's fake science. We shouldn't even discuss it because time is precious. I have a short question. Hello. Actually, I wrote my question. You were telling us about different organs. My question is about teeth. Have you learned to grow teeth, and can we expect this in the future?
So there is a lot of work being done in teeth. Actually, there's a lot of efforts in that area coming out of many different laboratories. We're also working on teeth. One of the things about teeth, though, is that, as you know, when you're a baby and you develop the teeth, you develop this milk teeth that then you drop off and you develop other teeth that gain strength. So it's not about making the teeth, because that, in fact, it is easy to create the engineered teeth, but what's difficult right now is to make sure it has the strength that it acquires with time, because it doesn't happen overnight in the human body. So yes, there's a lot of work going there, and there's promise in that area.
Пожалуйста.
I would like to thank all the speakers. It's been a very lively discussion. What do you think about prevention? Because you haven't mentioned preventive measures to ensure longevity. I think prevention is very important. It's easier to prevent a disease rather than to treat it. What are you doing for that? We have been telling you only about prevention. We grow old and then we have disease, and that's what we mean. We have to fight aging before you developed cancer, before you had a stroke, before something happened. There's a healthy lifestyle, but we have to go further. We need more work to do with genome, but it doesn't happen, and we were trying to discuss why this work hasn't been done.
Prevention is easier. The reason prevention is not easier is you can't get compliance. We can tell people what to do, but it's very hard to compel them to behave with a healthy lifestyle. Essentially, though, that's what we're trying to do. We're looking for strategies, whether they're lifestyle, drugs, supplements, or more radical solutions that we can do to people while they're largely still healthy to keep them healthy longer. So to me, aging research really is ultimately about prevention.
Я про профилактику еще добавлю немного.
And I would like to add one thing. Cyborgization could be a solution, because it's true that the problem of compliance is very important, and our patients might stop doing it. But if we implant a container with some medication to the person and a chip that can control it, then it will be much easier. For example, the person can take the medicine automatically. For example, a person is climbing up the staircase, and then we can stimulate him, give him some extra medication so that it was easier. Diabetics are moving towards the systems. The glucose is measured, and then they get some insulin, and this could be done later with children. For example, instead of buying vitamins, but the vitamins have to be taken regularly, because overdosing is possible, and that's not good. Let's ask some final questions, and then I would like to ask all the speakers to make some conclusions, some final remarks. My question is for Vladimir Filipov, related to prevention. Nobody wants to be old. I know about this program, Longevity, and they developed a program on Qigong. And I know that one center for Qigong was opened in Zelenograd, and I was the founder of this center. So what do you think about it? I think that it's a great method of prevention, and it has a very good results. I will be brief. I think that we have created a very transparent system of funding. So if we pay for each person that comes to you, and we pay the fee begin with 165. So if you explain all these things about Qigong, and then you give us reports on numbers of people that visit you, then we'll be able to give you more money. And it's very easy, it's very transparent. We want to be as many people as possible to take part in this program. We want to increase our number so that we had 500,000 people joining this program. So let's just make some final remarks, some conclusions, maybe wishes, your hopes. First of all, don't be afraid of radical solutions, cryonics, chips, transplantation, including heart transplantation. This has to be normalized. Another thing is it's important to understand that it's a complex problem to ensure longevity, to overcome immortality. It means that we need new approaches, new managers. It's not only about investments. And the third thing is that each person has to understand that the radical life extension will involve your personal futurology. For example, we knew in the past that death will come sooner or later. And so there is this final point that we won't be able to overcome. But now we can understand that there is a very good chance for us to live longer. So it's very important to think what I have done for the future, what am I going to do in 10 years and 50 years. So these are my three wishes. Don't be afraid of radical solutions. You should understand that it involves complex thinking. Don't forget about the future. Mikhail, I can offer a solution which is super important, that can save your life, that can give you a could give you a hope and a light at the end of the tunnel. You should subscribe to my Facebook. My name is Mikhail Patin. I provide a lot of information. It's very difficult. It's not that there's just one recipe, don't breathe or do something. It's very complex. Mikhail Patin, Facebook, become my subscriber and you won't regret it. Then many people ask me, what can I do? I'm a simple person. I'm not a businessman. I'm not an official. I'm a very simple person. So stop being simple. Because, human beings are complex. We are very different from animals. Let's just take responsibility. Let's deal with difficult issues. So it's very useful to keep asking, what have I done today? What have I done this week? Just to identify what should be done with life, because that's our common goal. So Facebook subscription is one thing, then consider yourself to be an ordinary person, and there are so many lectures on YouTube. You can again find Mikhail Patin on YouTube. There's a series of lectures, but you can also listen to other lecturers. I think a good education will help you to live longer. Thank you. Anthony?
Thank you. Yes, I think the main thing here for everybody in the audience is, how can you have a better quality of life? And the main thing is, you have to use your resources in your body, just like you had a bank account, and how you're going to invest that bank account. And basically that investment is eating well, sleeping well, and staying active. Staying active. That's the most important thing. And as a physician, what I would have to say to you is that whatever you do not use, you lose. And it's a very simple thing. It's the one thing that we always say. If you don't use it, you lose it. And many of you may not know this, but there was one of the very first people who started pushing exercise in the U.S. was this TV personality, Jack LaLanne. And he basically, at the age of 90, was still out there doing one-hand push-ups and full of energy. So there's a lot that you can do to prolong your very life. And as I have said before, it's not just about prolonging your life, it's living longer with a better quality of life. And what you can do to help that is help yourself to do that first, and then talk to your government officials, talk to your academicians, and promote research in this field, because it's very important.
Brian?
Brian?
I can't really add to that, so I'll talk about a different topic a little bit to conclude. And I'm much more optimistic about the state of aging research than you've heard from Misha. We all want things to go faster, we all want more resources, and we certainly need that. But there have been two fundamental discoveries in the last 15 years that I think are going to push the field forward dramatically. One is we have a number of different potential interventions that may slow human aging. We don't know if they work yet, and it's not going to be an easy path. Some things are going to work, some things are not. We may have to figure out how to do the test the right way, but we have lots of candidates to slow aging. The other is that we've now identified candidate biomarkers of aging. So there's strategies to measure the rate at which your body is aging. And again, none of those are completely validated, but there are a number of candidates, and I'm very confident that many of them are going to tell us important things about aging. So now the question to me is, how do we do the human studies? How do we take the interventions, give them to people, use the biomarkers, and demonstrate that we can slow or reverse processes of aging? And I don't know that we have the perfect clinical study to do that. I don't know if it's a classic clinical trial or a community-based study, but I really believe the pieces are in place to start making an impact on the biology of aging in humans. And I think we'll begin to see that in the next few years. And I don't know that immortality is around the corner yet, but again, I think that modest and significant gains in healthy life expectancy are very possible, and I think we'll begin to start to see these in the near future.
Друзья, так незаметно.
Friends, we have had this discussion for an hour and a half, and time flies. We had different points of view, we had some arguments, and no matter how well our scientists, how well the research, how well the scientists are doing, how good the research is, but it also depends on us. We have to check our pressure, we have to fasten our belts, we have to go through regular checkups. So this is a must, and we won't be able to live without this simple thing. So let me thank all the speakers today: Danila Medvedev, Mikhail Patin, Anthony Atala, and Brian Kennedy. Thank you very much.